When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes? Hi, I'm Gregg, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. So we are very excited to have our good friend, Leslie Ross-Degnan, here with us again as we talk about a book. The book that we're going to talk about today is called Our Souls at Night, written by Kent Haruf. And Leslie, I'm just going to pass it on to you.
Thanks, Janet. So, Our Souls at Night. I enjoyed this book.
I did too.
Likewise.
Yeah. It wasn't a really long book. It was actually pretty short. But there was a lot in it about aging. But let me just, before we start to talk about the book, I want to say a little bit about the writer. Our Souls at Night was Haruf's last novel that he wrote. He was 71 when he wrote this last novel. He was ill. He was dying of lung disease. He sent the book to his editor in September in 2014, and he died in November. So the book was actually published posthumously. My first hit about this book was that it was about loneliness and grief and how we seek comfort to cope with these inevitable issues of aging, really. But it's also about family, or could say how we choose to define family. Do we just go beyond partners and children and grandchildren? Do we consider like community and friends, family? So there are some interesting sort of extensions of all of the themes in this book. But before we launch into the discussion about the book, I want to tell you more about Haruf. He was an American writer born in the Western U.S. His father was a minister. And this is important because as a minister, they moved a lot. He grew up in the Western states and Midwestern states, but mostly they moved around a lot to small rural towns in Colorado. And I think his father did most of his ministering in that state of Colorado. That kind of defined him. And I'll tell you a little more about that as we get along. But both of his grandfathers were ranchers. And this is really what Haruf aspired to be. But life kind of took an unexpected turn for him. When he became a young adult, he joined the Peace Corps. And he taught English in Turkey. And those kinds of experiences, when you're young, they have a profound effect on your life. It's like once you take them out of LA, they're just never going to go back. But anyway, when he came back from the Peace Corps, he studied English at the University of Kansas. And then he was drafted in Vietnam. It was that time, the Vietnam War. But Haruf, probably because both his grandfathers were ministers and they were religious, I'm assuming, I don't know about this for sure, he was a conscientious objector. So he served his time in a rehabilitation center for injured vets in Colorado. He didn't see any action. But when he finished his service, he got a job teaching high school English. And this is when he began to write. So following that passion for writing, as one does, he later applied to a program, a very prestigious program, the Iowa Writers Workshop Program. He applied several times and didn't get in, but finally he got accepted to the school and he kept writing, but he wasn't published. He didn't get published until he was about 41. I love these like late bloomer stories
Yes.
when it comes to writers.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's just plugging away and writing and trying to get something published. And his first novel, The Tie That Binds, it did not sell well, but he was noticed and he got some good reviews and he was praised for his writing style, which is very spare. And we see this spare style in Our Souls at Night. He uses very little punctuation, and the whole story is just kind of short sentences and dialogue between the main characters, Addie and Lewis.
I don't know if we want to talk about this later, but I was curious about that, like what that was about. What was he trying to communicate to the reader by not using punctuation?
Yeah, I don't know. You never knew who was talking. There were no quotation marks. There were no dialogue tags like he said and she said, and there wasn't a lot of that. Maybe there was a little bit of that, but I think it was that he wanted you to stay in the flow. I think that part of his goal was to make it more intimate, which I think it really did, because the whole story is really told through their conversations with each other. Don't you think? I mean, there's an intimacy about that, right?
Yes. And that's how it started, actually, when she went over and said, I'm lonely, and especially at night, I want to have someone to talk to. And that was like the basis then of the whole story.
There was a style for a while there from the 60s on where there were a number of American writers and probably English writers too, who wrote without quotation marks, without the he said, she said. And one of the reasons that it got started was different enough that people would get noticed if they wrote it that way. But also the feeling was that the punctuation and the he said, she said would interfere with the flow. In a real life conversation, I'm not going to end up the sentence that I'm saying by saying he said.
Yeah, that's a good point, Greg. I agree. It does interrupt the flow.
It took a bit of getting used to. In fact, I found it a little annoying at first. It's like, come on, use a quotation mark for crying out loud. I don't know whether it's the narrator talking, her talking, him talking, somebody else talking. Come on, give me a break here. But it turned out that little extra effort that I had to make, I think, brought me more into the scene that was going on. And it did make it more intimate.
It does take you long as the reader to figure out who's talking. I was concerned about that in the middle too, but then it just started to flow because there were only two characters really. And so the back and forth was pretty clear.
It's interesting to think, Leslie, you were saying at the beginning of this episode about some of the themes. And I wonder if intimacy is also a theme.
Different kinds of intimacy. His style was recognized. So he kept that style, apparently. I haven't read any of his other books. Have you? Either of you?
No.
But apparently that's kind of the way he writes. I'd like to read some other books. So Haruf had to keep his day job since he wasn't successful as, hadn't published a successful novel yet. And he was teaching at Illinois University where he was able to keep writing and submitting. But it wasn't until his third novel called Plain Song, which sounds really interesting. I'd like to read that one, that he enjoyed some commercial success. And Plain Song, in fact, was a New York Times bestseller and praised as, quote, here's a quote, a stirring meditation on the true nature of rural families. And this book was compared to Willa Cather's My Antonia. And I loved that book. And I think because Cather also wrote about rural life and families, but her writing about life, she was writing about life in the prairies of Nebraska, was similar to the passion that Haruf showed for his rural life in Colorado. I didn't think their writing styles were really similar at all, only their topics. They kind of stayed with the same kind of theme, families and rural life. So with Plain Song then, Haruf was finally able to write full time. So when that happened, he got really prolific. He published 6 novels, all set in rural Colorado, including this last novel, Our Souls at Night.
One thing I'd throw out there is that many of his novels took place in a town called Holt, Colorado, that he made up. So it's an amalgam of places that he knew about. And rather than write about an actual town, he made up a town. So he made up the town's history and who the people were. And I haven't read any of the other books either, but I'd be willing to bet that some of the characters in this book, Our Souls at Night, also appear in some of the earlier works. And that's a good research project. I'm going to go find out later.
Yeah, I might actually read another one of his books just to see how closely related it is to this one. So let's just launch off about what this book is about. Oh, did you want to say something, Janet?
Well, the first thing I was going to jump in and say is I could not figure out what the title meant. What was the relationship of the title to the book?
Oh, okay. That's a big conversation. But we could start there.
I kept thinking, what is that? And I kept waiting to kind of connect it to what I was reading. And I thought it's probably really obvious, but I can't figure it out.
Okay, so he sets up the premise of this book in the very first chapter when Addie, for our readers who haven't read it, it's not really a spoiler alert, but this is the very first chapter. So I think you can reveal this. Addie is a widower and she's lonely, especially at night. She can't sleep. She doesn't have anybody to talk to at night. There's no body in her bed and she just can't sleep. So amazingly, she plucks up the courage to go over to Lewis's house. Lewis, who's like a neighbor, and he just lives up the street. And he's someone that she really had no previous relationship with other than the fact that he was a neighbor and she knew his wife a little bit, but his wife is also gone. So she knows he's a widower. So she goes over to his house and she asks him if he'd sleep with her. I mean, I just love it. I just thought it's amazing that she's like, oh no, I mean like in a platonic way, no sex, just companionship and a way to chase off these feelings of loneliness for her, especially at night. So she was trying to meet her need and satisfy her, get herself some companionship. And of course, Lewis, as any man would be, is a little taken back by this. And so he says to her, I'll think about it. You know? She looks disappointed, but she seems disappointed when she says that. But of course, he calls her then in a couple days and he does come over and they develop a relationship that holds their loneliness at bay as they share their life histories. I mean, look at all the stuff they talk about. They share their life histories, their families, their fears. I mean, sleeping together takes on a whole new meaning and it's very intimate. There's no physical relationship, but they share their souls at night. They just share everything. I think that's where the title comes from. Eventually, they become very good friends just from these nighttime conversations, and they get deeper and deeper as the book goes on. You know, like how their partners died, how her daughter died. They talk about their kids. They talk about their wishes. He talks about a relationship he had outside of his marriage. They just bare their souls to each other in a really short amount of time, which I just found fascinating.
And in a way that they never would have done if they weren't in that bed in the dark. They'd known each other for years, sort of casually, the way that you know people. He lived 2 or 3 doors down, and there was more of a connection than that, which was that you mentioned that her daughter died. But when he said, well, why me? She said, well, I knew you were a good guy because you were a good teacher to my daughter. And she is still grieving her daughter all these many years later. So there was that connection there through her daughter. One of the definitions of intimacy is undefended heart. An undefended heart is indistinguishable from soul. So they were connected on the deepest possible levels because they were in this small bed in the dark and were able to be themselves.
Yeah, they were both in their 70s. They were both lonely, and they just opened up in a way that was really unusual and even more intimate than having a physical sexual relationship. To me, it seems usually we do that first. We have an intimate sexual relationship with somebody and then we get to the heart stuff. But this was an interesting reversal.
Yeah. Well, so many topics about being oldish are touched on in this book. So, of course, that's one where whether your body doesn't work that well around actual sex or whether for whatever reason that's not part of your life, but as you age. But this book is saying, what is intimacy? Like you said, Leslie, it's so much more than the physical act of sex. One of the quotes on the back cover of my book said, "A beautiful story of second chances." I just was looking at this quote that I had written about they were, so Lewis and Addie, or Lewis in particular, is talking about, oh, what will people think? He doesn't want to go to her front door because he's afraid the neighbors will see him. And she's just kind of like, what are you doing? Coming to the front door. She finally won't answer the back door unless he comes in the front door. But when he says, what will people think? And she says, I've made up my mind. I'm not going to pay attention to what people think. And I think that's another, piece of oldishness versus just getting old, is trying new things and not being afraid.
Yeah, not caring about what those nosy neighbors think. Yeah, I totally agree. Addie says so she doesn't care what other people think. And then later on, Lewis jumps on that bandwagon, but takes him a little longer.
Yes.
But he does jump on that bandwagon.
Yes.
And then they decide together, which I love. They say, let's just go out together for lunch and right in front of everybody and just let everybody know and we'll reveal it. And then eventually they become old news. The gossip dies down, of course.
Yeah, they rise to the occasion. And when they're talking about, let's just go walk down the main street and go to the main place to eat lunch, and she goes, maybe I'll wear a red dress. She's kind of like, okay, I can do.
It's so great.
One thing as I was taking notes and I was writing about how it was such a fun kind of surprise beginning, obviously, and it really catches your attention, I think, as the reader, like, what are you doing? You're going to this neighbor that you don't even know and asking if he wants to sleep with you at night. But then I wrote in parentheses, why is that surprising? Why is it so surprising? I mean, I guess maybe it would always be surprising on some level.
Well, do you mean like, yeah, is that surprising for an old person versus a young person? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, that's what I wondered. It was such a surprise beginning as I was reading. And then as I was reviewing that, I just thought, why was it so surprising? And maybe it was just me, but I was like so surprised, that she did this.
I know, but I also thought, what a great solution to her loneliness and how brave she was to just come over and say, let's just sleep together. We're both lonely and I can't sleep at night because she was really clear about it. I admired her.
So she was brave, which I think is can be an aspect of oldishness. In fact, I think it's the theme of our podcast. How do we approach aging as bravely as we can?
Yep. And come up with new solutions to old problems and don't care what other people think anymore. She uses a common phrase. I lived my whole life worrying about what other people thought. Now I don't care because where that ended up was unhappy.
Well, yeah. And both of them had experiences in their lives where they were kind of hiding things from people, and those were around like health and death, that kind of thing, where her daughter died and things changed in Addie's family, and her son and her husband became very estranged from each other because I think that the father kind of blamed Gene for the death of his daughter, Connie, because they were playing outside and she ran out in the street to get something, to chase something, and she got hit by a car. It's something that Addie didn't talk about for a long, long time, and they never really talked about with neighbors, like how hard that was in their lives. And then with Lewis, he also had this thing that he didn't want anybody to know about, but of course, everybody in the neighborhood knew that he cheated on his wife. He didn't know they knew, but they all knew. So that story all comes out. He shares that story with her, and she shares that painful story with him. And it's kind of a reminder that we all live our lives the way we live our lives, and we can't really live our lives according to what people think of us to a certain degree. We have to be genuine in how we live our lives. And I liked that message actually a lot.
There was a clear message about how isolating it is to be living in that way of worrying about what other people are thinking. Because in this town that Haruf invented, everybody was living in their own separate little houses and no idea who the other people in town were, no real idea that they were actual people. And everybody in that town was feeling isolated. And some people used the scene where his buddies ridicule him for taking the step of doing what they could only imagine was an affair again, using that ridicule as the wall of separation. And is often the case with people who bully a little bit, because it was the scene to me felt like bullying was, I'm going to do this and I'm going to push this negative attention onto you, and then that negative attention won't be on me. And so the net result of that is isolation. And people build these walls around themselves, reinforced in various ways. The town that he built in the high, dusty plains of Colorado, it wasn't in the mountains of Colorado, it was in the high plateau, and you could almost feel the wind blowing through the town. That whole thing was a metaphor for our souls at night. And why aren't our souls at night touching each other? And why is it only at night? I think is one of the reasons for the title is, why is it only at night? Why can't this come out in the light of day? Which he showed clearly when they went out to lunch. Let's take our caring for each other out and let other people see it.
Well, you make a really good point there by adding the element of isolation to caring so much about what other people think. Because if you're going to walk that line and try to be the ideal neighbor or citizen or friend or whatever, and caring so much about what other people think about you, you are going to isolate yourself. That is very isolating. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting the way you put it. So why do that? Why not just come right to the front door, right from the get-go? Right.
That's right. It's a good question, but it takes a while to break through that because that's programmed into all of us.
That's really true for older people. That's absolutely true. I remember my dad in assisted living too. It was hard for him to make friends because people had their barriers, whatever you want to call them. They protected themselves in some way. Maybe it was from fear of a relationship or somebody finding something out about you. I don't know, but it's very isolating.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
And maybe some of it is the assumption of what this is supposed to look like. So you get old and your friends, maybe a lot of your friends die. And so that's it. I'm just alone, which is true. And, so Addie showed us an example of that's true. And I'm not done yet. And what else could this look like? And how can I have connection? One thing I was thinking about the title also, Our Souls at Night, is I wondered, how we reviewed the book, Walking Each Other Home. I wondered if night was also symbolic of this stage of our lives. So our souls at night, because then there's all these threads in the book about what can still be in our lives as we're aging.
Yes.
Yeah. Lots of levels.
Do not go gentle into that good night.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. While you're alive, stay alive.
Yep.
Yes.
Don't worry about what people think about you, or stop living your life, or don't go out and have fun, or don't walk downtown with a red dress.
I think that's what his group of friends represented. We've accepted the message that we're done. What are you doing? Like the fact that Lewis did that was then automatically causes them to question, unless they just push it away, then they have to question, maybe that could be me. Maybe I could still be dating, or I could have someone to sleep with at night. So, but I wanted to say something about how Haruf brings in some themes, just little mentions about being oldish that I just thought were fun. Like at one point, Addie was talking about having a UTI, or maybe he did. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. It was Lewis had the UTI. And that was right at the very beginning when he was going to go over there, and he ended up in the hospital. And she thought it was a lie. Remember? She thought she just chickened out and got cold feet.
That's right. So I just thought, okay, that's an oldish problem. I mean, it can happen in our lives when we're younger, but it certainly can happen a lot more when we're older. Another very different theme was when Addie's grandson started living with her. The author put into the story that Addie did not let him bring his phone to the table and eventually kind of weaned him from the phone, except for certain times. I thought, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That Haruf chose to bring that into the story.
Yeah, very interesting. In fact, I had a big question about what Jamie's role was in the story. What did he provide in their relationship that was important? Partly, I think that it made them feel more like a family because he was the grandchild, right? And they kind of both revisited their caretaking roles of children. He pulled out that old train set, and Jamie really loved him. And I think he was a very lovable guy.
Yeah.
And I think it showed Addie another whole dimension of Lewis, that Lewis had been a teacher. So he probably was pretty comfortable around kids. But it was another kind of intimacy that he showed with this child, that Addie could see. And the same with her. She was a little different and caring and loving, and she disciplined him, wouldn't let him take his phone, that kind of thing. But she also gave him a lot of freedom and wanted him to get a dog. I mean, getting the dog was great. The dog is another kind of symbol of, I don't know, I think love, because dogs are just all about love. But there are all these other, like Jamie and the dog, I think that they were characters that just were able to allow Addie and Lewis to show more love to him and to each other.
And they allowed for the bringing in of another theme, which is how thoroughly our culture is in the rigid culture, that they were breaking so many norms, sleeping together in the same bed. And so many of the norms that they were breaking, one of the norms that they were breaking was that love is constrained, love is restricted. And because they both loved this kid, another character in the book came along and used that as an excuse for changing their relationship, forcing them to change their relationship because it had this love in it, and love was not allowed.
You mean by Jean? Are you talking about the adult children?
Yeah.
Neither of the adult children approved of this relationship, and I thought that was an interesting thing to bring in too. And one of the problems her son Jean had, who was Jamie's father, was that they were sleeping together in the bed. And Jamie was in there because he was a fearful child. He had night terrors and he didn't like to be in his bed alone, which is why they eventually got him a dog. But in the meantime, they were sleeping together in the bed, all three of them.
I don't think it mattered to him. But at the time, all they were doing in the bed was talking and sleeping.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And they brought this boy who was terrified. This is all great symbolism, right? So they brought in this boy who was terrified, and what soothed his terrors was being in the middle of these rays of love that were flown between the two of them and kind of filled him up on the way by. And that's not acceptable in many parts of our culture.
Yeah, you're right. They did. That was a big kind of taboo. And Jean didn't like it. Jean didn't like it at all. Her son, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it touches on, I thought it was very interesting, a theme that does happen in oldish relationships that start when you're oldish, is that the adult children, just in general, are very worried, fearful. What's my mother or father, especially what are they doing now? So for the mother, her son was like, he's going to be taking money from you. Don't you understand? I think it was so reflective of misguided caring from adult children that happens.
Commonly happens,
It commonly happens. I'm thinking of a couple we interviewed for their book, Ready for Love, I think is the name of it. And that they had met in their 80s on a dating site and decided right away this was who they wanted to be with for however much longer they're going to be together, and told their respective families. And on each side, the kids were like, what are you doing? And you just met her. And the kids were in their 50s. And so they're probably thinking, oh, my parent is losing it or being scammed or something. So I really liked it that Haruf put that in there as a pretty major upset for them as a couple. I like it that he created Addie's son as someone who was also struggling. It was just interesting, the complexity of it.
It was, because he's struggling in his own marriage, which is why Jamie was there in the first place, so he could straighten out his marriage. And here his mother was having this wonderful relationship with this man. So those were two interesting different levels in the book.
One of the things that I liked about the book was that it was simple, was spare. I don't think there were any extra words in the book at all. There was nothing flowery. There was no lengthy descriptions of the scenery. There was no exposition of the characters. They were just, he plunked us down in the middle of the story, and here's these people, and we could learn about him.
Yeah, and there was a lot of depth, even though it was simple in that way. There was a lot of depth to the story.
Exactly. It was very complex, and it had a simple surface and a complex underneath, which I think is in contrast to a lot of modern novels where they have this flashy surface and no depth to them at all.
I felt bad for Addie because her son really put her in a position where she had to choose between her family and Lewis. That goes back to that earlier thing I said about what is family. It would have been nice if Jean had been able to accept Lewis into the family in the same way that Addie was able to with her grandson. That would have been harmonious, but there was a lot of tension there because Addie felt like she had to choose family when it came down to it. And then they were separated. And I just felt the ending was so sad because Addie's living in Denver with Jean. She's far from Lewis and she misses him. And they feel like teenagers, like the mother says, you can't see that boy. He's not good for you. But they're calling each other at night. They're still trying to be together. And that one quote at the end, I think it's almost at the very end of the novel. And Addie says, it made me cry. She said, well, we're still talking as long as we can, for as long as it lasts. Well, it's just a very sad ending to me.
I agree. I thought it was really sad. And it did question for me what it means to be family. Like I really wanted Addie to fight for this family that they had created together, that she and Lewis were now family. And Jamie was a part of that. Jean wasn't yet. But I wanted her to fight for that. And when she said to Lewis, they are my family, I wanted her to say, and you are too now. And let's figure out what this can look like. I just want to say something about the movie, which had a different ending, I think. I felt at the end of the movie more of a sense of hope that they were going to maybe get together again or that it wasn't the end for them.
Yeah, the movie was really good. We were talking earlier about the movie. And yeah, if you don't read the book, you should definitely see the movie. I'm just talking to our listeners because the movie really follows the book very closely. And the people in the movie are Jane Fonda and Robert Redford. And Greg, you were saying earlier that is not how you pictured Lewis and Addie and me either. But
yeah, I'd say read the book first. If you're going to read the book and see the movie, read the book first.
And I have to say that because I don't like sad endings, since I'd read the book, I started watching the movie and I turned it off about 2/3 of the way in or something because I knew what was coming. And I thought, oh, I don't think I can watch the rest tonight. And I thought, okay, Janet, watch the rest. Well, I'd finished the book and that's why I knew what was going to happen. And then I thought, anyway, so I just was interested in that. It reminded me of how sad I was at the ending of the book and I didn't want to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was sad and angry. I wanted to go find that young man who said, if you either come here and never see that man again, or you'll never see your grandson again. I hated that. I wanted to find that guy and punch him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too.
Slap some sense into the guy because he was suffering his whole life because he felt like nobody loved him. He was at odds with his father. He was at odds with his mother because he was at odds with his father. And the thing that happened with his sister, and he was lonesome his whole life. He should have been like, oh man, there's love here. I want some. Not if I can't have it, you can't have it.
Well, unfortunately, it gets more complicated than that psychologically. And the hope of that was that mother and son were reconnecting and she was finally hearing from her son what it had felt like for him when his sister died. I was reading it and thinking, so it's giving this mother this opportunity to help this heal between them. And I really wanted her to say, and yes, I want to come. I want to show you how much you mean to me. I want to help with my grandson. And I'm bringing Lewis with me. And we can either be here in the house with you two, or we can be in a separate place and come over every day. And I wanted her to fight for all of it.
Yeah, I think that's what the hopeful note was in the movie, because in the movie, I got the feeling that Addie made the decision to help her son, she and her son get over that and heal from that. They never have healed from that death of the daughter. But now that the father wasn't there, and he was a big source of tension with Jean, because I think Jean felt the father blamed him for his sister's death. So I think that my hope at the end that I kind of interjected on top of the whole thing, because I didn't want it to end in such a sad way, was that they worked it out, and then she and Lewis got back together again.
Yes.
And he was okay, and everybody was good, and they became more of a family over time.
Yeah.
That's my imaginary.
I like that ending.
Yeah, I'll have to go watch the end of the movie, because I didn't end the book did not end. Hopefully for me, it ended sadly, and
It did.
the part where when she had to make the choice to go be with her son, if she was gonna have to abandon Lewis to be closer to her son, or give up her grandson. The way that she did it was to just kind of abruptly end the relationship with Lewis. And they talked a few times after that, but she wouldn't see him. And the reason she wouldn't see him is that she knew that it would be too hard. And she knew that she would not be able to let go of him. So she cut him off really completely. And in the book, at the end of the book, she ended up moving back to the town, and he was like, yeah, we saw each other in the store and we'd say hello. And yikes.
Yeah, it was sad.
Yeah, I didn't like that part. I wanted to go and pick her son up and just shake him. I think, compassion for his situation. His father blamed him for the death of the sister and was cruel to him. But the backstory in the father was that he was just a jerk anyway.
Yeah, that was a tough thing. Yeah, that was.
So if you're reading the book, what happens, the book will open up your heart while you're reading it. And you will become involved in the love that develops between these two people. And it's real, and it's clear, and it's pure. And your heart's going to break a little bit too. So
Yeah, don't just take our word for it. Read the book. You'll feel your own feelings about it.
Yeah, so if you're having a good day and you feel like you need to cry, read this. It's a very short book. You can work up a good cry in a few hours.
Well, and then in the meantime, from the time you open the book until the end of the book, you get to read about issues that we're all experiencing as being oldish, making peace with our past when they had those conversations in bed at night, figuring out things together that they might not have been able to figure out on their own. Yeah.
We recommend it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like an oldish handbook.
Yes. And we could add the addendum. Don't give up. Figure out this and Thank you, Leslie, as always.
Yeah, that was a great conversation.
It was great to have you here. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Janet. It's always fun. And thank you, Leslie. It's always fun and informative. And I've said it before, but it's so much more meaningful to me to read a book with you two than it is to just read it on my own. First of all, I would never have read that book. I never heard of the author. And I guarantee you, Janet, you said you asked ChatGPT for a list of oldish books, and I ain't doing that anytime soon. So I would never have read this book, but I'm so glad that I read this book. I learned a whole lot about oldishness from reading the book and from having this conversation with you two. So thank you both very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
we'll do this again. I think we'll do this again sometime soon.
I think we'll do it again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We had a great time reading and discussing this book, Our Souls at Night by Kent Haruf, and we're sure you will too. If you want to buy a copy, bookshop.org/shop/oldish. If you do buy it or any of our books, we'll get a small commission to support the podcast and an independent bookstore of your choice will get a share of the cover price. A good deal all around. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there too if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to love everybody.